Hello and welcome to this week's edition of Politics Today, and in this programme today we'll be asking, is our asylum system out of control, as we seem to have a massive problem with uncontrolled immigration, and as we see almost our government and its institutions really declining in such a way that our nation is now in peril. So to join me on this week's Politics Today, I'm joined by Hugh Kitson, documentary filmmaker, together with David Hughes for Prayer for Parliament. So Hugh, great to have you back on the programme, and I know that you wrote quite a profound and a very interesting article for Prophecy Today, really as a kind of wake-up call for our nation, reflecting on the dramatic political events over the last 6 weeks or so. So do you want to share a little bit about the article that you wrote and its prophetic significance?
Well, the article was actually called Reliving the UK's Darkest Hour, and of course that title, Darkest Hour, was from a film released, about 3-4 years ago now, about Churchill's first few days as Prime Minister in May of 1940. And of course at that time the British Army was facing annihilation on the shores of Dunkirk. But what was interesting about it, that there was a political similarity in that the ruling Conservative Party was trying to dump its newly appointed Conservative Prime Minister, and actually it was the Labour opposition who insisted on having him there. This is the incredible thing. But what would have happened had Churchill left office or been thrown out of office, one hates to think. Certainly, I think Britain would have surrendered to Hitler. We would have had the swastika flying from Victoria Tower and Buckingham Palace. And what might have happened to Britain's Jewish community just doesn't bear thinking about. Okay, it's not quite that bad, but we're in a state of total chaos at this point in time, and probably what we need more than anything is prayer. Back in those days, the nation went to prayer. King George VI called the nation to prayer, and we don't have any of that right now. But I also focused on the issue of moving the British Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, because Jerusalem is the city of the great King, and the nations of the world want to try and make it the capital of an Islamic Palestinian state. And I tell you what, the Lord is not going to return to Jerusalem as the capital of an Islamic Palestinian state. So we have an underlying spiritual problem there. And one of the things that may well help Britain spiritually and bring God's favour upon us again, and I'm thinking of Genesis 12:3, is actually acknowledging Jerusalem as Israel's capital and moving our embassy there.
Wouldn't it be extraordinary if our Hindu Prime Minister Rishi Sunak did that? Which would be quite incredible. And David, welcome back to the programme. I'm sorry that because of the time of the recording of this programme that you missed your weekly prayer in Parliament. But we're very grateful that you're here. So
we're going to go in on a Thursday as well now. So.
Oh, good. So there you go. So we're increasing prayer for Parliament now, yes, because of Politics Today, which is great. But do you want to share with us some of your recent activities with prayer for Parliament, because it is so essential that Christians are in our government institutions, and just looking back at the chaotic past 6 weeks have been absolutely catastrophic, and of course we're talking about our broken asylum system right now. It seems like every government institution is just starting to break. It looks like now we're in a position now where our nation looks ungovernable, and the political problems are mounting so much that only the Lord intervening and His grace can save our nation from destruction.
We've been doing quite a lot of interceding. We've been into Parliament every week at least once. We've had Zooms at least once a week as well. And we've been literally following up a lot of the prophetic words that we've been hearing. We've been getting prophetic words ourselves. It's quite clear that God has had plans, and that there's this big spiritual battle going on in this nation. The problem in this nation at the moment is there isn't enough prayer cover, by a long shot. I mean, the people just are not taking it seriously. There are intercessors, yes, and there are people praying, but not to the standard it's needed. God, we believe, definitely Liz Truss was the right time. There were prophecies saying when Mary Elizabeth meets Elizabeth Mary, I mean the Queen and Elizabeth Truss, and everything was absolutely fine. But then you've got a spiritual battle where the globalists are literally trying to pull this country in one direction, and there isn't enough prayer to make certain the country stays on the godly track that it needs to. Also, interestingly enough, we've also been praying a lot for Suella Braverman. There's been a prophetic word, very powerful one, that she is actually someone God is watching right from, this was from before she even was one of the 5 to being chosen, and we've been praying a lot into that. She's very supportive of Israel. Her husband's Jewish, so she's got Jewish blood in her family, and we agree with what you were saying about, you know, moving the embassy to Jerusalem. The problem in this nation as well is that a lot of the churches don't believe in praying for Israel today. You've got people who are totally for Israel, and you've got people who, including the Church of England, don't believe that you have to pray for.
Worse than that, in opposition to the embassy move to Jerusalem, which is even worse. Yeah. And just shows the kind of spiritual chaos that we're living in.
We can see it in Parliament all the time. You know, there's absolutely, you've got Rottweilers at one side and others people trying to do, but the Christians are very much in the minority there, sadly.
No, absolutely. And Hugh, talking about the situation, so our Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, is coming under increasing pressure. I mean, she was sacked by the then Prime Minister Liz Truss for a breach of the ministerial code in sending documents on phone and our emails to parliamentary colleagues that didn't have security clearance. So she's under a lot of pressure. Can she survive?
I don't know whether she will survive. I pray that she does. I really do. Again, as you've said, there's a battle between the globalists who want us as a vassal state, so to speak. And that was why I believe the Lord led us out of the European Union. And now we've got this uncontrolled, I'm going to use the word illegal immigration. It is illegal, and most people are turning a blind eye to that fact. It is actually it's an offence to walk into this country with no proper documentation and so on. And on Monday, she referred in Parliament to the situation being like an invasion. And of course, that prompted a huge outcry, really I would say from the globalist side, including the globalists who are in the Conservative Party. Now, if one asked the Labour leader or the Labour Party, how would you fix this situation? I don't think they would come up with an answer. I mean, okay, I've got some ideas, but they're probably irrelevant.
Not to us, they're not. Not to our viewers either. So
okay,
I want to hear later. But going on to David, I mean, I think we have to really lay the blame, a lot of the problem on our former Prime Minister, Theresa May, who I think in 2018 signed up to an official UN document calling for open borders. So even if the Conservatives, even under Boris, sounded tough on illegal immigration, reality was they haven't done much about it. And then Boris came up with the Rwanda plan, that we assess asylum seekers in Rwanda and fly them on a one-way ticket to Rwanda. And of course, the Liberals were up in arms about this. And of course, you know, more expensive legal intervention to stop that happening and stuff as well. So we know that the whole concept of the nation state is under threat, particularly in this kind of globalized world and as on this fast track to world government. But what are your thoughts particularly on how is the Conservative government's hands tied behind their back, and because we signed up to this UN charter, does that mean we're legally binding to be a nation of open borders? So in reality, the government may sound strong and tough and have strong rhetoric on illegal immigration, but reality is they won't do much about it.
I don't see why the UN charter should. I mean, UN doesn't have much power around the place. Why should it have power over people coming in? I mean, America's got tough borders. We supposedly have tough borders. You and I were talking many times in the past. We need more patrol boats. We need the Navy down there a bit more. And this issue has never been looked at. It doesn't matter which government's been in or which foreign or home secretary or whatever. They haven't got to grips with it. Again, it's back to prayer. I mean, just to ask the viewers, how many of these immigrants do you think are Christians coming into this nation? Well, the answer is probably extremely low, because there are many people of other religions. This is a Christian nation, and I repeat again, it has always been a Christian nation, and it always will be. But we're falling asleep, and we need to pray into this. It's only prayer that's going to basically wake the nation up, get the borders sorted out, and get the whole country back on its feet.
And repentance. Because
yes.
Without repentance, nothing happens. And Hugh, I mean, if we look at the figures, according to the papers, as of the recording today of Tuesday, the 1st of November, some 40,000 illegal migrants have entered into the UK shore through the small boats crossing the English Channel. And if we compare that to last year's figures, which was 28,500, that's a massive increase. And we've still got another month to go, so we could expect to see another 10,000 illegal migrants to go. It just looks like the government's lost total control of its migrant policy, and also it looks like our asylum system as well is totally out of control.
Yes, well, yes, they have lost control, but I have to say that they have been hampered by people who want to allow all of these people in. Now, one has to remember there are genuine asylum seekers.
Absolutely.
And that they do need to be treated humanely and properly. But from what I understand, the vast majority of these people coming in are economic migrants. There are a lot of criminals among them, and as I said earlier, they're illegal. And what the country, or at least Parliament, needs to do, if they can get it through, is actually, well, a number of things. They first of all need to make a law, and if it means cutting our ties with the European Court of Human Rights, we have to do that. Anyone who comes in illegally doesn't stay under any circumstances. And one of the things, of course, that the British government would have to do under those circumstances is set up a consulate somewhere on European soil where migrants who want to come to England or Britain get permission first to come in the proper way. And then if people come in on small boats, then they go to Rwanda. I can think of actually a better place than Rwanda, but it would take some setting up, somewhere like the Falkland Islands, which are under British control anyway. But
I don't think the Falkland Islands would like that very much.
Well, they wouldn't. they wouldn't. But you see what's happening, they come here, they're sapping our resources. The government is paying, I hear, £7 million a day, putting people up in hotels. And our services are at breaking point. And this is certainly putting our own population at a huge disadvantage to satisfy really economic migrants. So it needs tough action. It needs laws that are biting and can be and will be enforced.
I mean, one of the problems we have is one of the detention centres called the Marston Airfield Processing Centre, which was bombed over the weekend. Some extremists threw a firebomb at it, and they were saying it only has a capacity of 1,600, but they're detaining 4,000 people in this detention centre. It's only supposed to be detaining people for 24 hours in there, but the people are staying there for weeks in solid and awful conditions. So, you know, the Rwanda plan did work because it acted as a deterrent, but as soon as the illegal migrants and the criminal gangs that are behind them, which they're paying extraordinary sums of money to help them to get into our country illegally, have kind of realised that that was just an empty threat. So unless the government is seen to be taking very tough action on this, this is not going to deter illegal immigration, is it?
No, they've got to take very tough action. Manston, actually, I know from old because it was a big RAF station. Even my grandfather was commanding officer there before the war. But it's a huge, vast area. It had the longest runway in the whole of Great Britain and was used as a spillover. But there's so much land there, they could easily put more and more huts or whatever. Space is not the problem, it's what they've put on it. But I agree that they've got to get to grips and sort the thing out before sending them off to the hotel. I mean, a lot of the argument is, oh, they should be putting them in hotels. Well, that's going to cost a lot more than actually keeping them where they are. But there's got to be a deterrent. We should be, as a country, standing up and saying, right, they're going to go to Rwanda, whether they like it or not. But the other thing is that we've got to get through the protocol. We need to cut off that last link that we have with Europe so that we can literally not be dictated by the human rights and everybody in Europe. We have our own sovereignty. We should be able to have to use it. Again, prayer is needed.
No, absolutely. And also what's interesting as well is that this is the long-term potential strategy by Braverman, where she said earlier this month that migrant crossings the channel will face a ban from claiming asylum in Britain. And also the asylum seekers need to be sent to Rwanda as a kind of long-term policy decision. And that's got to be seen to be working. Plus also there is calls for the government to create a new cross-channel agreement with France that would target the number of boats reaching the UK. So of course we need greater cooperation with France. And of course the French are saying we've got so many migrants coming to our nation, we've got a problem with them. And of course the best thing we can do is to ship them across the channel to the UK, and that becomes your problem. So clearly there has to be some sort of incentive for the French government to do more to prevent these illegal migrants from crossing the channel, because it is dangerous. It's a dangerous crossing. It's one of the busiest shipping lanes in the world, and they're putting their lives at risk, especially as we're heading into the end of autumn, beginning of winter, that they're putting their lives at risk by crossing the channel.
Absolutely they are. I also, you see, I think there's one other area that, and I totally agree about prayer, it's an invasion that's going on, but the law needs to be strengthened where aiding and abetting an illegal immigrant becomes a criminal offence with a severe penalty to it. And I'm talking about even the so-called human rights lawyers who are making a packet out of and is really obstructing the government's will in the matter, and also the charities over in Calais, they are aiding and abetting illegal immigration, as well as the criminal gangs, of course, and it needs to be a criminal offence. And I don't believe for a moment that it's impossible to deal with these criminal gangs in France. The French certainly don't, certainly not under Macron. They're doing a token amount to make it look like they're doing something, when in fact it can't be that difficult to patrol your shores and just stop this activity. So I think there needs to be much more determination, and I'm afraid it's very difficult to rely on the French. I mean, they've still got a grudge against us for leaving the European Union.
And going back before that, the Battle of Waterloo.
Yeah.
And David, a big issue I think has to raise concern with this one is the issue of social cohesion as well. I mean, the prospect of 40,000 illegal migrants crossing the English Channel alone for the year 2022 is absolutely ridiculous. But it's also, as you were saying earlier, putting a huge strain on the NHS, our education system, social services. And it's also then creating this social resentment because people are on waiting lists for health treatment, you know, dental care has gone up, and yet these migrants are getting first class medical services, dental care, and it's then creating this public anger and resentment about they are favouring better treatment, better housing, and what have you, and it just seems unfair. And when you have that system, creates that system, the whole thing starts to break down, does it not?
If one looks back to the days when Tony Blair was Prime Minister, and he had 10 years or so, they were keen for people to come into the country because they would offer them places, and so they knew they were going to get extra votes. And they would put them into the townships where, of course, the Labour Party pick up these constituencies, and that's been going on for ages. So my query then is, what's going to happen if the next general election brings in a Labour Party? Because they'll be at a quandary as to whether they have to do something to stop more immigration, or do we let more people in who are likely to vote our way rather than any of the other parties? I think there's going to be a big implosion in this nation. We're going to get to the stage where people once more will say enough is enough. And I think it's part of God's plan to shake this nation to its foundations. More people, everything's failing, everything's getting more expensive. What's going to wake this nation up? Well, it's all part of the same ingredients. There's a big mix going on, making up this sort of like Christmas pudding. And I think it's going to blow up in everybody's face. But it hasn't got to the stage yet where people are feeling that they've got to pray more and they've got to wake up, and actually this nation needs to turn back to the Lord.
I think that was Peter Mandelson who came up with that political strategy in the 90s in order to ensure that Labour would have a continual electoral success. Yeah. Because he figured out that they would vote Labour. But this, I think David raises a really interesting point with this one, is that this is a big dilemma for Keir Starmer and the Labour Party, knowing they're something like 30 points ahead in the polls and look likely to be forming the next government. Do they ignore the issue of immigration and allow those illegal immigrants to come to the country and then assimilate them and then harness their votes? Or do they risk further alienating their traditional core voters who voted for Brexit in the what known as the Red Wall seats, being potentially lost for Labour forever?
I must say, I think it's the latter, really. I think that Labour does face a dilemma if they try to reverse it. And let me say this, I mean, I think the Conservatives are under judgment as well, yes. Very much so. Yeah. But heaven help us if we get a Labour government, really, because I think the whole globalist agenda will be accelerated under a Labour government. But I think you're absolutely right. It's prayer and Christians standing up. I mean, we're having our rights as Christians being compromised. And of course, no one remembers God's rights at all. It's all about human rights, which is a good thing in itself. But God has his rights. He's actually our creator. And there have been many prophetic words about the direction in which you've been talking about. And I think that God is dealing with us as a nation because he wants us to turn back to him. It's redemptive judgment.
Absolutely.
Can I just say that, quickly, the fact is, we're talking, people might, on the viewers might think basically, oh, they're obviously Tory or they're against Labour. It's nothing to do with that. We are Christians, and in Parliament our team are Christians, and we look at things in a godly manner first. If we could have a government that formed of Christians from every party and called it the Christian Party or whatever, that would be the ultimate dream, but it doesn't work that way.
No, absolutely, and I think we got alongside party politics because all the major political parties are in the hands of the globalists now, and they're all pulling in the same direction. It's just a question of what magnitude and direction and speed they apply themselves. So, you know, I just think we've got an incredibly bad crop of politicians, and really this is a product of turning our back on God and taking Jesus out of the public square, of not praying and interceding for our nation, and also for Christians for not standing up on biblical principles. Yes. and standing away from taking a back track in politics. Just within 30 seconds, how important is it for the church to be the conscience of the nation, to give that moral guidance that the nation needs? Because sadly, our church is silent and our prayers have dried up.
Yeah, there is a small remnant church that prays, but we do need the leaders, the Archbishop of Canterbury, to make public statements, but I'm afraid he's just not doing that.
No, absolutely. David and Hugh, thank you so much for being my guests on this week's Politics Today, as we discussed our immigration crisis and how our asylum system is breaking down and how our nation is in peril. I think it's a very good description, as Hugh said earlier in the programme, that we face a similar situation as we did in May 1940 when our troops were stranded and surrounded by the Nazi forces, but we saw a great deliverance by God. So again, we need to pray for our leaders that we would have peace, and we pray that God would intervene in our nation as he's done it countless times in our nation's history. So I want to thank you for watching this week's edition of Politics Today.